Okay, let's dive right into this. Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're unpacking a really fascinating and, frankly, highly debated framework known as the Great Feminization theory. This was recently popularized by creator Ronnie Folks, who was analyzing the work of writer Helen Andrews. Now, the source material puts forward a pretty provocative thesis. It argues that as the demographics of our major institutions change, the actual fundamental rules of how they operate are shifting. So we're going to break down this theory completely objectively, step by step, to see exactly what it claims is happening in the modern workplace, our media, and the legal system.
To do that, we'll use this 5-part framework today. We're starting with the tipping point theory, then we'll look at the evolution of group dynamics, cancel culture and competition, institutions under feminine norms, and finally returning to meritocracy.
All right, Section 1, the tipping point theory and the demographic shift. So, the entire foundation of the source's argument actually rests on a very specific demographic shift happening within our organizations. It centers on Helen Andrews' concept of the tipping point theory. Basically, the definition here is that when an institution reaches a majority of women, its rules of engagement automatically shift from masculine norms over to feminine norms. The creator claims this tipping point acts as a massive catalyst. It means the behaviors that get rewarded in a workplace completely change overnight, and the behaviors that get punished, well, they change right along with them.
And this brilliantly illustrates the stark dichotomy the creator sets up. On one side, we've got traditional, institutional, masculine norms. The source defines these as prioritizing open hierarchy, rationality, ruthless competition, and taking risks. But then, on the other side, we have feminine norms. These prioritize consensus, empathy, group cohesion, and emotional safety. Now, the theory argues that basically everything we currently label in society as woke is actually just this exact shift. It's an institution deciding to prioritize that feminine column over the masculine one.
Moving right along to Section 2, Evolution of Group Dynamics and Evolutionary Origins. But you've got to wonder, where did these behavioral differences actually come from? Well, the source references researcher Joyce Bennenson's framework to argue that male and female survival strategies evolved very differently back in early small human groups. Because they were solving totally different survival problems, they developed completely distinct styles of cooperation. According to the creator, men evolved to tolerate open hierarchy and direct disagreement. Basically, they can work together even if they don't really like each other. Women, on the flip side, favor consensus, persuasion, and, this is a key point in the theory, burying any necessary criticism under layers of compliments just to maintain group harmony. The source highlights this highly revealing quote to really anchor the point. The outcome of a discussion is less important than the fact that a discussion was held and everyone participated in it. This emphasizes how the theory views female group dynamics as prioritizing inclusion and social cohesion way over objective, hard results. Now, the creator argues that while those consensus-building strategies are absolutely fantastic for a small friendship circle or a family, they simply don't work for massive institutions. Those large organizations require impersonal rules, objective standards, and, open disagreement to actually function properly. Which brings us to Section 3, Cancel Culture and Competition, looking specifically at feminine competition. This leads us into a highly charged argument about how these feminine norms aren't just about playing nice and cooperating, but how they are actively weaponized into modern woke behavior. The creator introduces this concept called the guillotine of wokeism. They argue that cancel culture is actually a brutal form of feminine competition. It's not physical violence, right? Instead, it achieves dominance through reputation destruction and social exclusion. The source explicitly describes cancel culture as mean girl gossip formalized by the internet and HR departments. To really drive this home, the creator points to the firing of James Damore from Google, arguing he was pushed out through subtle, back-channel feminine aggression and claims of a hostile work environment, merely for stating what the source calls objective biological facts. To explain why this ideological shift happens in the first place, the source relies on social psychologist Jonathan Haidt's framework of fairness. So the crucial point is that on one side, we have fairness as equality. That's a more liberal and, according to the theory, feminine focus on ensuring equal outcomes for everyone. On the other side is fairness as justice, a conservative masculine focus on people getting the outcomes they individually earned. Using this framework, the creator argues that a feminine definition of fairness naturally and basically inevitably leads to diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI, mandates. The claim here is that under this model, unequal outcomes are instantly assumed to be unfair, and that leads to artificial quotas entirely replacing pure competence.
Let's move to and see how this builds in Section 4, Institutions Under Feminine Norms, where we look at these specific domains impacted. The source applies this exact framework across several major societal domains. First up, human resources. The claim is that HR enforces a culture that prioritizes psychological safety and niceness way over competence, which ends up turning an exceptional but maybe blunt employee into a total liability. Next, universities. The argument here is that female-dominated administrations prioritize emotional safety, enforcing trigger warnings over the pursuit of objective truth. They cite examples like student walkouts during controversial speeches. Then we have media, which allegedly filters news through emotional narratives. And finally, law, where the creator warns that subjective feelings are increasingly being treated as actual evidence. Interestingly, the source notes that employees are actually taught to use HR terms like psychological safety specifically to manufacture liability risk and silence dissent within an organization.
Consider this striking statistic, 55%. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that according to the source, this is the percentage of female staff currently at the New York Times, having become a majority back in 2018. The creator points to this as a prime real-world example of an institution crossing that demographic tipping point we talked about. They argue that because women are now the majority, the entire filter of information has shifted to an inherently feminine lens. The theory uses this to explain modern media bias, claiming that reporting now prioritizes emotional resonance and the absolute avoidance of offense over objective reality. To back this up, the source points to a fascinating study by Martin Scheffer on the rise and fall of rationality in language. If you look at the timeline, since roughly 1980, language associated with rationality and objective facts actually began a steady decline. Then, starting in 2007, language associated with emotion, intuition, and what the creator literally calls political vibes accelerated sharply. The source claims this exact linguistic pattern is highly visible in major news publications like the New York Times, which they say proves a broader cultural shift away from hard facts toward emotional consensus. But out of everything, the domain the creator is most alarmed about is the legal system. In the year 2016, women officially became the majority of law school students. The source argues that while judges are currently still majority male, within a single generation, this huge demographic shift threatens the very foundations of Western common law. Because remember, that system was meticulously built on impersonal standards, rational judgment, and objective evidence. Here are the specific, highly serious impacts on law that the source is warning about. First, an erosion of due process. Second, the rise of Title IX tribunals on university campuses, which the creator claims operate under an assumption of guilty until proven innocent. And third, the prospect of personal feelings functioning as formal legal evidence. The source actually describes this as a totally Kafkaesque scenario, a legal culture run by feelings where you are presumed guilty based purely on someone else's emotional experience, and the formal process exists merely to punish you. Finally, let's wrap up with Section 5, returning to meritocracy and the creator's proposed solutions. After laying out this extensive multi-industry critique, we reach the creator's proposed solutions for institutions allegedly caught up in this dynamic. The source concludes with a very specific, sweeping list of demands to fix this perceived imbalance. Their solutions include a complete return to objective meritocracy, formally removing the veto power of HR departments, eliminating all DEI mandates or artificial quotas, and legally allowing the return of a masculine office culture. The creator firmly demands the removal of what they call anti-discrimination social engineering. They argue that only by removing the thumb from the scale and returning to ruthless meritocracy can the most skilled people actually shine and society truly flourish. So what does this all mean? Well, it leaves us with an absolutely critical, provocative question to consider. Can modern institutions balance emotional safety with objective meritocracy? This explainer has laid out the Great Feminization theory exactly as presented by its proponents, really highlighting that profound tension between a culture of empathetic cohesion and a culture of competitive, impersonal results. Whether you view these shifting organizational norms as a vital evolution toward inclusivity or as the dangerous destruction of objective truth, the demographic changes sparking this debate are undeniably real. Thank you so much for joining me for this deep dive. I highly encourage you to take these insights, look at the institutions around you, and critically analyze these frameworks for yourself. See you next time.